Okay, so we've got the anterior teeth set. We might make a few tweaks to those as we go. Now we want to think about where we're going to be positioning the posterior teeth. The lower six is probably the most significant tooth with regards stability and so on, so we're going to look at positioning that in the ideal position to start with. I've got our upper and lower teeth here. We're going to try these. They're a bit higgledy-piggledy on the card because I've taken them off and ground the underneath in preparation for processing. So I've ground the underneath of each one and placed it back on the card to save time on the video. So where do we want to position this key lower tooth then, the molar tooth? Well, we want it over the ridge as we've discussed before, so we've got our pencil line on here, and then we also want to make sure that we're not starting to set the tooth up the incline of the alveoli here. So if there's a hollow in this portion, we want to make sure that we sight the tooth in the hollow of the alveolar, and we can take tools like this one to try and find that position. So we can just pull the pencil back a touch. We can scribe the contour of the alveolar onto the side of the model, and that can help us determine where we want the lower six to be placed. I don't often do this, to be honest, but it's recommended by some. So we can take our compass and we can scribe the contour, and we can see where the dip is and position our tooth in about that point. And if you get into making dentures and setting teeth and where the teeth should be positioned, there's some rules about how far forward and back from this point you should go and so on, and you can read about that, or we'll discuss it in another video at a later date. But we're aiming for about this point with the central fossa of our lower six, so we can put our rim back on. I can mark the side of the model like this to give me an indication of where we want that tooth to be, and then I can go ahead and set it. Or if you're really fancy, you can get one of these gadgets which helps you locate where the tooth wants to be. So that hopefully you can see on here, I can locate my dot over the ideal position in terms of anatomy, put our rim on, and then we can position the central fossa of our tooth here in the rim. Anyway, not everybody has one of those. Pencil marks are as good, maybe not quite as quick or as flash, but as good really. So we can take our knife, cut away at the block. We've got a little bit of reference here for the occlusal plane. Soften the wax underneath, and then we can start positioning the lower six. The lower six wants to be positioned so that the cusps are pretty much even in the occlusal plane, going across the arch, up very slightly at the back if necessary. We might do some fine adjustments to that once we get the other teeth in, so particularly the upper six. So I'm lining my tooth up with the mark at the back, with the mark on the side of the model, and we're getting those cusps even, the buccal and lingual cusps even, and then you can see we're at the level of the occlusal plane as well. And then we're going to see if our premolars fit this gap. If not, we'd probably want to get a smaller or larger tooth depending on how we get on. So let's take the 5 and soften the wax in between the 3 and the 6 here. Try and get both set. Again, we can position this tooth in line over the alveolar ridge. Make sure it's butted up nicely to the 6, like so. Have a look from the side, a little bit low, bring that in, and now you can see we've got a small gap for the 4. So I don't think we're going to get that in. Let's just see how we're getting on with the canine. I might just pop that canine out a touch wider in the arch so that I can create a little bit of space for the 4, and also squeak this molar tooth back just a touch. We're going to fit that in. Just get that canine out a touch. Premolar in, and we're just about there, I think. Let's check that we're sensible when we look from the buccal aspect. Like so. Now, what we want to do at this point is make sure we can get the upper 6 into position, and that it's going to occlude nicely when we go into lateral and protrusive excursions, and adjust our teeth accordingly to make sure that we're going to get contact. Now at this point it's worth having a brief think about balanced occlusion, what we're trying to achieve and what the alternatives are. So remember, when we're thinking about balanced occlusion, if this is the upper tooth and this is the lower tooth, we're aiming to get contacts here and here between the teeth. Not always the easiest thing to do, because when we go into the lateral excursion, it means that, hope you can see this, colour it in a bit. There's the upper tooth, there's the lingual cusp of the lower, buccal cusp of the lower. When we go into the lateral excursion down in this direction, it means we've got to get these contacts sliding nicely, and this contact sliding nicely. So this palatal cusp and the buccal cusp, the functional cusps, have to slide down harmoniously with the movement of the mandible, which is of course dictated by the condyle. So there's a lot of engineering to do here when you start thinking about all of the teeth in position, because we want to repeat this on the 5 and the 4 as well. And of course when we go into the non-working side excursion, we want this cusp tip to be sliding down this cusp tip. So sometimes now, or often I should say, and frequent or even frequently, we adopt lingualized occlusion, which has been around for a long time, but and most tooth manufacturers now make teeth for lingualized occlusion, where we have the lower cusps which are slightly reduced like so, so we have more of a bowl shape to the central fossa here, and then the upper tooth, rather than trying to create two contacts, we have the palatal cusp coming down into the central fossa like so, and the buccal cusp is reduced like so. I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but you get the idea that we're only trying to achieve a single contact between the upper and the lower tooth, which makes everything a lot easier to engineer, and we want that single contact directly above the alveolar ridge. So hence why we try and put the central fossa of the lower tooth above the ridge, and we get the palatal cusp contacting in that central fossa directly above the ridge, and hopefully we've got a nice stable denture. And then when we go into lateral working side excursion, we've only got to get this contact when the mandible moves down in this direction into the working side excursion, we only have to get this cusp incline working nicely with the cusp tip. And when we go down into the non-working side excursions, this is working side or balancing side as we call it in dentures, then we only have to get this cusp incline working nicely with the cusp tip. So it's a lot more simple to set up the teeth and adjust the teeth, both technically and clinically, if we work with this lingualized occlusion. Lingualized because it's the lingual cusp that does the work. We call it palatal in the UK. A lot of other people refer to the palatal cusp as the lingual cusp on the upper. We reserve that for the lingual of the lower. Anyway, let's have a look at what we can do with our denture. So we've got our teeth lined up here with the central fossa over the alveolar ridge. When we're working with lingualized occlusion, we actually reverse the relationship on the fore, and we have the buccal cusp of the fore contacting the central fossa of the upper. We'll come to that later. We'll set these up with conventional, if you like, occlusion here. A conventional tooth arrangement for simplicity for today. So now we've got the lower tooth positioned, we want to take our upper 6 and see if we can get that to occlude nicely. So I'm going to remove some of this wax from the upper block because it's a bit hefty at the moment, and you can see where our palatal cusp needs to be, somewhere just here. Just by closing the models together you can see where the lower 6 central fossa is. It's about there, so that's where our palatal cusp is going to be. So I'm just going to reduce some of the material away from this block just to make it easier to position and move the teeth in the block. Same on this side, just take some of this material away. So of course we're giving preference to the position of the lower 6. The upper 6 might be slightly buccal to the alveolar ridge, might be on the alveolar ridge, or very slightly palatal in some cases. It's not quite as critical for the upper tooth because we've got a lot more support for the upper denture, because we've got the hard alveolar, and we've got, well, it's typically hard, sometimes we have some fibrous tissue on top of it, but typically it's hard, and of course we've got the palate. So the stability of the upper denture is usually easier to achieve, or good stability of the upper denture is usually easier to achieve than stability of the lower denture. So if we have to move the teeth out of the ideal spot, then let's do that on the upper teeth. So here we go then, going for that conventional approach. So we're putting the mesiopalatal cusp of the upper 6 into the central fossa of the lower 6. I'm just going to lock my articulator up for a moment just so I can get this contact nice without it wobbling all over the place. And you can see that we've got the buccal cusp hopefully lined up with the fissured out in between the buccal cusps of the lower teeth. So class 1 if you like. Well, it is class 1. Classification for denture teeth is a little bit odd, isn't it? So there you go. We can see that we've got that one lined up now, and we've got the buccal cusp of the upper tooth lined up with that fissure that goes between the buccal cusp of the buccal cusps of the lower teeth. Hopefully now these premolars, the 5 and the 4, should butt up to the 6 and each other without too much trouble and too many gaps. If we do have a gap, it's not the end of the world. Usually you can't tell. Some people position the 4, the upper 4, when they're positioning the anterior teeth for aesthetics as well. I haven't in this case, I've kept it simple, but let's have a look how we get on. And that means they have to do all the work on the 5 to incorporate a gap or put a bigger tooth in or whatever. So there we are, we've got the 5 position now. We've got contact between the upper and lower teeth. I'm going to check these in excursion in a second. Just give that a bit of a tweak and bring that palatal cusp down a touch. So with something like this now, and then we'll have a 4 put into position as well. Just going to soften my wax, it's just a firming up a touch. Oops. Pop that in. And hopefully we've got some teeth nicely occluding. We'll do another video for lingualized occlusion, I think, at a later date. So I'm just going to straighten that one up a touch. Like so. Platal cusp just needs to come down a little because it's not quite contacting. There, we're not far off at that. Straighten it up. Buccal cusp up a touch. Good stuff. Okay, let's have a quick look at the lateral excursions then. The wax is still a little bit soft, so we might need to just let that cool down a touch before we tweak them into the final position and then do any grinding of the cusps to get the perfect contact. But you can see now when we go into that lateral excursion, we're not a million miles off there. So the 6 and the 5 look nice. There's a little bit gappy with that 4. Let's just see if we can just improve that now. Just by pushing that platal cusp down a touch. And the buccal ones come down with it, and we're not far off at that, are we? You can see my canine is just causing the denture to tip. Look, can you see? The two canines are just contacting. And when I go, you can just see the top denture starting to displace off the model. Yeah. This shows you why we need that balanced occlusion. I think it's the canine anyway. Yeah, it is. There's nothing on the other side. I might just whiz that off in a sec. And we'll see if we get something a little bit better. Okay. And then when we go into our balancing side excursion, you can just see the palatal cusp of the upper 6 contacting the buccal cusp of the lower 6 there, hopefully. Let's try and move in a little bit closer. And that would be our balancing side contact. So the mandible's now moving away from the camera and we're going into the non-working side excursion. Okay, so I am going to let that wax cool down, give the teeth a final tweak into position, and I'm also going to set these teeth on the other side, and I'll talk to you once I've done that. Okay, so we're just about there now with setting up our teeth. I was a bit concerned that this right hand side was just drifting out a little bit into the buccal corridor, so I just checked where the position of my lower 6 was. It's just coming a little bit wide. Obviously we'd check that at try, and if it was a problem then we may well set that tooth in crossbite, so put that tooth in and have the buccal cusp going into the central fossa, or somewhere in between. There's a compromise in between the two extremes, if you like. So at the moment we've got the palatal cusp going into the central fossa. We could move the upper tooth in quite a way and get the buccal cusp going into the central fossa, or we can flatten off the teeth and have the cusps the teeth biting cusp to cusp. We're just a little bit skew with on the front here as well, so I was just doing a few tweaks to these. This patient's right, which looks a little bit higher than the patient's left, so I'm just doing a bit of fettling as we go. But essentially we've got all the teeth in the right place now. What I'm going to do is just let that wax cool down, and then in the next video we'll show you how to tidy up the waxwork and add the polished surfaces. So we have the occlusal surface of the denture, which is obviously the teeth, the fitting surface which fits against the patient's mucosa, and this in between is the polished surface, so that's the gingival tissues and so on all the way around here. And we'll show you how to add that and tidy it up to make it look a little bit more like the real thing rather than a tatty lump of wax that we've got in front of us at the minute. Okay, but we're getting there now. Lower teeth look nicely over the ridge. You may have seen me just check that in the setup of the patient's right hand side. I know it was in fast forward, but stop him, articulator sitting down. So you can see with this fancy gadget we can put the red light over the central fossa of the tooth, and there we go, we're pretty much over the centre of the ridge there, and we can do that for any one of these teeth and see where the alignment is and make sure that we're making the denture as stable as possible. Okay, so I'm going to call it a day on this video, and I'll see you in the next one for putting the waxwork on.